Hello, fellow deal makers. Welcome to another episode of the Deal Scout. I'm your hostess, Susan Reilly, and today we have an interesting guest, Chris Miles. Chris is lovingly called the anti-financial advisor. Sounds ominous. I've been known Chris now for a couple years, and I invited him here today because he has an interesting perspective on finding and vetting deals. So welcome, Chris. Hi.
Hey, it's good to be on here.
Yeah,
I
thanks
like how you
for
say it's ominous. It makes it sound like it's
ominous.
so dangerous in some
I
ways.
know. The anti-financial advisor. That's a new term, and I doubt many people have heard that. So I'm looking forward to you explaining why that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's jump in. I don't want to start with that. I want to know more about your earlier days. I want to know what your childhood was like and what your parents were like and what caused you to become an entrepreneur investor.
Yeah, I've had to ask my question that I had to ask myself that question quite a bit because, I definitely wasn't planning to become an entrepreneur. I mean, that was never really my plan initially. I went as a kid, I was a very kind of a quiet, introverted, nerdy kind of kid, right? Like I was the one that would finish his papers first and get his test done, just like wanted to be first, like always like done and fastest and everything else. And so I kind of easily breezed through school. That was never a hard thing for me studying or anything like that. In fact, wouldn't even study. I would just go and do the test and get out, right? But I did know that I wanted to do something more. So at first, I wanted to be a physicist. I wanted to be an astronomer at one point.
Oh,
And then as I got in my teenage years and I started watching a lot more MTV, I wanted to become a music producer because I was going to work for like Motown or LaFace Records or something like that, right? But then I had a stepfather who pretty much talked me out of it. My dad actually, it's interesting because he was like very much you work hard, you go to get good grades, go to college, get your great job, and then your life's set. Very conservative, post-depression era mentality. Where my mom, she's actually the starving artist, so to speak. She was trained by the same master painter that trained Bob Ross. If
oh
you know
yeah.
Bob Ross
Okay.
with his happy little trees and everything else, right?
Right. He had
So
a
she was
TV show,
actually
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she didn't have the afro. She did have a perm in the 80s, but not the afro. And so she was doing that same kind of thing. She was teaching art classes. She had her own art gallery. So she was very much that kind of mentality of follow your dreams, do your passions and that kind of thing. Where my dad was more like, your word is your bond. Don't half-ass anything, that kind of stuff. I
Right.
mean, that was really kind of who I was raised by was two very different people. And that's where I get kind of this left brain, right brain, contradiction, with myself all the time for that very reason. So eventually I went to college and I realized, I'm going to go actually be a sociology major. I didn't know what sociology was, but it just felt right, especially when I started to find like I kind of converted to Christianity. I was actually going to become a Muslim when I was a teenager. Then I converted to Christianity later on. And I just felt impressed. Like the spirit just told me, you should go into sociology. I'm like, great. What's that? What's sociology? I study
Okay.
groups of people. I went into that. I was going to go to marriage and family therapy, but then I realized after being married at a young age, I didn't want to deal with my own marriage, let alone somebody else's. So I got away from psychology, went back to sociology, and I was going to go into business and become a business consultant. And that's kind of what eventually led me to become an entrepreneur because I figured if I'm going to become a business consultant, shouldn't I be someone who has real life experience like my dad always taught me, like, get that real hard facts, right? So I actually
Mhm.
dropped out of college with one class to go to get my bachelor's. It's supposed to be a 1 year break and it ended up being a permanent break. I dropped out of college and never went back and became an entrepreneur.
You uh, so you dropped out of college when you had one semester left?
Not even a semester. It was actually one paper. It was an independent study course. I'd already written my thesis. I already did my capstone project. Everything was done.
Wow.
I just had to take that thesis, condense it into journal format and publish it, and I would have been done.
Wow.
Um, but at that time, I was going through a divorce with my first wife.
Hmm.
And I thought, this might be a good time just to take a break and maybe get some real life experience going in the business world, find some business to start. I didn't know what to do, but start some business, get that experience, and then I'll go back, finish up, and then get my MBA. But after going into business, I realized, man, why do I want to go back to school for more things that may not even help me, really make more money as a business owner?
Hmm. Hmm. So what did you do? Where'd you go?
So I was wandering around for a few months, and then a friend of mine he said, "Hey, I just got hired in this financial firm. Like it's really cool." And I remember thinking back that in my childhood years, of course, being a product of the 80s, money always intrigued me, especially after watching Family Ties. If
Hmm.
you guys remember Michael J. Fox and Family
Right.
Ties, Alex P. Keaton. I remember he wanted to be an economist. And I thought, oh, well, money's kind of cool. It was like the wedding singer. He's like, I like money. I have a little jar with a bunch of money in it. I'd like to make more of it. That's where you come in, right? When he was going to get interviewed for the bank. And that's what I kind of felt like. I said, I know about money. I took some accounting and banking courses, in high school and college, but I was like, I want to learn more about money because worst case scenario, at least I walk away learning how to create wealth. Best case scenario, maybe I'll even not just do that, but maybe I'll even help my dad who had worked so hard his whole life, thought companies would be loyal to him, and then they weren't. They'd lay him off, but then he'd get rehired quickly because he was very talented.
Mhm.
But he was always at the mercy. And I thought, man, this guy keeps talking about how he's going to work until he's dead. Like the stress of his jobs are going to kill him. What if I could give him some of his years of his life back? So I actually went in to interview as becoming a financial advisor. Didn't realize they took anybody off the street. As long as you could pass a test and not be a criminal, you can become a financial advisor. So that's what I ended up doing. And again, like being an entrepreneur so much, I said, I'm going to stay in this. I think I'm going to plant my flag here and do this very course.
Mhm. So how come you're not that now? What happened?
So it actually was partly inspired by what happened with my dad. So about 4 years in, my dad reached out and he says, well, when are you going to advise me? When are you going to become my financial advisor? Now, I didn't actually think he would want to because this is the guy I went to that, oh, well, come on, he's the guy that changed my diapers, right? And he was always very guarded about his money, didn't want people to know how much he had because he thought everybody was always trying to get his money. And so when he asked me, I said, well, let's do it. Sat down with him. I flew back to Portland, Oregon. I live in Utah, but I flew back to Oregon and sat down with him at that same table where he said, save everything, spend nothing, because that's the kind of guy he was, right? Just a cheap penny pinching saver. Well, I looked at his money. He had stuffed money in his 401k, got the match from his employer, everything that good boys and little girls should. He had paid off his house early, so he was 100% debt free. This guy was like Dave Ramsey's poster child.
Wow.
And I said, okay, Dad, you're 61 years old. If you want to retire today, even though you've done an amazing job, you're going to have to die in about 5 or 6 years because that's when you're going to run out of money. And he said, well, that's not what I was hoping to hear from you. You're supposed to tell me how I can get out of this job finally. I said, I don't know. You did everything right from what we teach as financial advisors. I mean, you've been stuffing money in your 401ks, you're getting the match. That's 100% return, right? BS. You're debt free. I mean, this is supposed to be what everybody's supposed to do, but it's just not enough. You just haven't saved enough. And it wasn't that he wasn't saving a good percentage. He was saving it quite a bit. But remember, like when there's like Y2K and different ups and downs in the market, you just never know what day you actually have enough, right? And so that bothered me. It bothered me a lot. And it
Mhm.
was just a few weeks later, I reached out to a friend of mine who I hired to be a financial advisor on my team, but then he quit to go do real estate investing, which I know you know a lot about.
Mhm.
So he was doing real estate investing, mostly like fix and flips and things like that. And so I decided to ask him, like, hey, how's life going for you right now? My hope was he would say, I'm broke. I want to come back and work for you, Chris. And I didn't get that. He instead said, Chris, life is amazing right now. My dad and I have actually partnered on some real estate deals, and we've now doubled his income as a professor at this local university. I said, whoa, whoa,
Wow.
whoa, hold on. You've been doing this for like 5 months, maybe? That's too good to be true. That's impossible. And he said, is it? Is it really impossible, Chris? And then I started arguing with like, no, stocks are better. Real estate stinks. Like you don't make any money in real estate. That's risky. And he finally just asked me, he said, Chris, well, how many of your clients are actually financially free where they don't worry about money, even the retired ones? I said, oh, well, like none. They all worry about money. They all worry about outliving their money.
Sure.
Okay. Well, how about this, Chris? Good job, by the way. How about this? How have you guys, as financial advisors, are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing the investments you've been recommending? And when I was really honest with myself and I started picturing there's over 100 people in our office, and I knew there was people working there since the late 1970s. And this is, by the way, 2005. I was like, these guys have been working in this business for 30 years. They can't even retire themselves. And they're supposed to have it all figured out. I said, well, none.
Mm.
There's your problem, Chris. And so I started going down this rabbit hole,
Yeah.
like the Matrix. I took the red pill, right? I started to look into cash flow and investing and passive investing for that matter. And even like not just accumulating and compounding interest, but how do you compound your income where you actually get paid income off your investments? Even just the fact when I realized somebody has $100,000 in the traditional financial world, you're only supposed to pull off maybe 3% a year if you're in your 60s. Well, 3% of $100,000 is only $3,000 a year. That's nothing to brag about, right?
Mm-mm.
But if that same 100,000, I get paid 1% a month by lending my money to a real estate investor. Now I'm making $1,000 a month or 12,000 a year. I'm making quadruple the income that I'd be making as using my mutual funds. And for a couple months, I try to make both worlds work. I try to be a financial advisor and still see how I can marry them together. And it came down to the point I couldn't. I either had to choose my integrity and quit, or put blinders on and just keep working in that business where I was at the height of my practice. And I chose the first. I chose the former. I actually
Mm-hmm.
quit. I said, I'm out of here. I'm not going to teach this anymore. I feel like I'm a liar and a deceiver, and I'm out of here. And so I actually quit. And of course, after I was doing that, I was still a mortgage broker. I kept that license still. And I still had my other licenses, but I wasn't doing anything on the financial planning side, just more mortgages. I was also trading stocks and options on the side. And then I want to learn how these guys did it in real estate. And as I started to learn what they did, later that next year, I was actually able to retire when I was 28 years old the first time.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. So my a question that I was going to ask you was, what did you learn about money and business from your parents? But what you learned was that if you do exactly textbook as the world tells you you should with your 401k and paying off your mortgage,
Mhm.
that's not going to get you far. That is
Yeah.
what you learned, right?
That's what real life taught me. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I was taught by them to just save, 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 right?
Sure.
Just save it forever like a squirrel, saving for that rainy day or for that winter of retirement. And you hope that the winter doesn't last too long, right?
Hmm.
And then what I found out, looking at the reality was, wait a minute, I really look at real life results, which is something my dad did always teach me, is like question everything, look at real life, don't just take people's word for it. When I started to really look objectively, I said, my goodness, the evidence, Tony Robbins says success leaves clues. Well, the success is lacking from the kind of financial advice. The only people I've seen that actually can retire well usually are business owners that sell their business for millions and millions of dollars and then put it with their financial advisor. And then they hopefully don't lose too much money with them, or somebody who
Hmm.
maybe did money, create enough money in real estate, and then the stocks is just an extra byproduct, right?
Sure.
Or they had pensions or something else that saved them. But never would I find somebody who only saved in their mutual funds and their 401ks and IRAs and then just lived off that. If they did, often I'll see people just trying to live on a tight budget, try to make ends meet just to have enough.
Hmm. Supplement it with the Social Security thing, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
hope
why
that.
so many people need Social Security for that
Hmm.
very reason.
Right, right. Well, so if you retired at 28, I believe you told me once that at one point in life, you lost over $1 million. Was that after you retired at 28?
Yeah, that's right. With the pride comes the fall. Because,
Hmm.
I got to that point. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was definitely, not many people would say this about me from the outside, but I knew internally I was pretty arrogant, right? I was pretty prideful about it all. I actually came out of retirement in 2007 to coach people how to do it. And sometimes people say, yeah, I just, like, I don't know how to make this kind of money. I don't know how to do this. I'm like, it's easy. Just do this. Well, it was easy because the markets were all in our favor, right? It was like this huge tailwind pushing us, especially in the real estate game. Well, when that stopped, it wasn't so easy. Plus, when I started a brand new business, right, all of our target market, they were real estate flippers. And in 2007, the banks started tightening their credit guidelines to the point where
Hmm.
flippers couldn't flip very easily anymore. And so they were going broke, which means our business wasn't making money. My real estate wasn't doing as well anymore. And I stopped a lot of my streams of income that got me to retire in the first place to go all in on my coaching company. And so it was like this perfect storm in this George Clooney, you're going to die kind of way that was happening. So that by 2008, I was in the hole like 16,000 a month. I was short 16,000 a month between my business and my personal expenses.
Yeah.
And I went from like what I say like millionaire to upside down millionaire, right? Where I was over $1 million in debt.
Wow. Okay. Would you consider that to be your biggest business mistake you ever had? And that's a
For
pretty big one.
sure. I mean, I mean, I made plenty of mistakes. I don't know. Was it the biggest one? Probably. I would definitely say so because, I was going in with different partners, and one of the partners was saying, you need to be the one going all in. And by the way, get rid of these other streams of income that I had. And that was a mistake, especially if you're
Mhm.
trying to teach people to create multiple streams of passive income. I'm doing it, and then I stopped doing it. So I'm not, again, now I'm not in integrity, right? I'm not in integrity for myself. And that was one of the dangerous things. Now, some people say, well, do you think with recession, everything else, would have those been affected? Yeah, for sure. I'm sure they would have been affected to a small degree. And also, I wasn't liquid either. I was trying to put all my money into my house, which is why I tell people all the time, like, hey, I'm not against paying off your house, but the thing is, it gets locked away. And when I wanted to get that equity out, the bank says, no, sorry, we don't like to give loans to business owners anymore, right? So, no, you
Mhm.
can't cash out your equity. So then my next goal was, oh, great, I got to sell my dream home. But then at that point, because everything was tanking in the real estate game, well, all of a sudden now I had equity, like I had a lot of equity in there, like something like 150, 200,000 of equity. It disappeared within a year, all gone.
Mhm.
And so then I had a short sale of property, but then the banks refused any offers on the short sale because why? The bank that I was with was owned by Lehman Brothers.
Oh,
So they weren't accepting any offers. And so they eventually,
right.
after a year and a half, I got foreclosed on in 2009, had to just give up the property. It sold at the courthouse for like 342,000, but I bought it for 612,000. I mean,
Mm.
that's crazy. At one point it was worth like $750,000, if that tells you anything. So anyways, like, I mean, I eventually got a $300 settlement check from Lehman Brothers. That was great for mortgage, fraud mortgage practices and whatnot from them. But that's the thing is like I did lose a lot because I wasn't liquid, which every business owner needs to be liquid. You got to make sure you have cash reserves, both for your business and at home to keep
Mhm.
you going. That would have kept me in a better mental state so that I wasn't so emotionally freaking out to the point where I was panicking and then I wasn't making good business decisions, right?
Right.
That alone would help me. But then also make sure I had other streams of income coming in so that I knew I was working in that business because I wanted to, not because I have to. And so when I
Sure.
rebuilt it, I didn't go bankrupt, but it would have been easier if I did. But I did go and negotiate and settle and then pay back all the loans and even personal money that I owed to family members and people like that. I paid it all back. And then the next time around, I said, now I'm going to do it right. And so that's why by 2016, got enough passive income coming in from my investments and whatnot to where now I was able to retire again by the end of 2016 when I was 39 years old. And
Okay.
so that's
Okay.
that's where I did it better, and that's where I've been ever since, and been growing that cash flow year after year. Because now when I work in my business, it's just gravy, and that's the ironic thing is if you're in business, the best thing you can do, funny enough, is to not need the business. When you don't need the money, and some people might argue with me on this. They might say, no, no, if you're hungry, you have more urgency. That's true, but you also work 10 times harder because you drive business away from that frantic energy, right? When you come across as desperate, that's when nobody wants to do business with you. It's
Right.
when you're relaxed, when you know you don't need the money. That's when you have a power play that works really well in business to allow you to be able to step in a place of power and say, listen, I know I can help you. I know I can serve you, or I know I can offer you something of great value, but I don't need you, right? That's an amazing place to be when you're in business.
Hmm. Hmm. It's that grinding, that term grinding that's out in the world and all over social media. I see it all the time about people saying, get in there and grind it out, grind it out, grind it out, when it comes to working. And it
Yeah.
just, and I think I've fallen for that too. I understand what you mean by that. It is that frantic energy that you
Mhm.
feel inside that, and people do pick up on that. People realize that. It's a
Yeah.
very subtle thing, but I do absolutely agree with you on that. So it's good that you've identified it too. I think that's really important.
Yeah, you hear people talk about like, you'll hear some quotes. People say hustle's a season, not a lifestyle, right? And that's
Mhm.
totally true. Like it's okay to like hustle, especially in those early days when you're trying to get a business off the ground.
Sure.
You're definitely gonna be working harder than ever. It's like trying to pedal a bicycle, right? You start in that first gear and you're just trying to grind along, and then eventually as you get momentum, it's faster and faster. You can shift gears and you have that momentum on your side. And I
Right.
agree with that too.
Yeah.
But don't
Yeah.
make that your permanent lifestyle habit where you're always hustling, always grinding. You will always be a slave to your own business. I mean, you basically bought yourself a job, is what you did.
Hmm. And you burn out so quick and just get so
Oh yeah.
exhausted with that mental game too. Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah. That's where we meet them in mastermind groups, right? And then That like once they get away from their business and they're in a mastermind for a few days, they drink themselves silly. They're out all night long, and then they crash physically because they're just so burned out. And
Right.
yeah, you don't want to ever push yourself to that point where it's now not just destroying your life and possibly your life expectancy, but it's destroying your family, your marriage, your mental, emotional state of being, your physical health, everything. You don't want to ever go that far.
For sure. For sure. Well, and speaking of your relationships, especially with your spouse, but
Mhm.
other relationships too. Um, there, don't you, do you agree that relationships are just everything in business?
Oh, absolutely. That's the one thing because people ask me like, hey, if you had to do it all over again, like I remember I was on one show, he asked if all you had was $1,000 and a laptop, what would you do? I was like, I would take that $1,000 and I would go take people out to eat, right? Like I would be doing brunches, lunches, whatever I gotta do, and with just those centers of influence or those influential people in those markets, and focus that whole meeting on how can I serve them, right? I think that's one problem is that so many people get hungry. Again, it comes back to that desperation, right? They're always trying to see what they can get from somebody else. It's like, no, what can I give you? If you come out with that service mentality, and I did this. I mean, when I after 6 years of that company I had launched, we actually did turn things around. You know, things got better. But then in 2012, the main partner and I split ways, and so I created Money Ripples at that point, and I had a non-compete, a 2-year non-compete that I didn't have to honor, but I did anyways. And so when I went out, that's exactly what I did. I didn't have a whole lot of capital to do. I mean, I even exchanged services with a guy to build my website, you know, and I did things like that. And but I went and I found people in this particular case, I was focusing towards the women entrepreneur space and specifically geographically in Utah.
Hmm.
That's because I knew that that was the one place that that guy didn't want to play in. So I went in that women entrepreneur space and I started meeting with different people that were in that, you know, that were influencers or people that at least were well known. And I would just get to know them and try to find out like what is it that they need, you know, like it could be personal life, it could be their business life. I would just try to understand where they're at, what they need. Could I, you know, impart some kind of wisdom, you know, if I had any, you know, for them, or could I connect them with somebody that might be valuable for them? And I just did that for a few months and it was a slow thing. It wasn't like I made massive amounts of money in those first few months. I mean, I made a
Hmm.
little bit because I was still advertising what I was doing, but the real hockey stick curve, that exponential curve happened probably about 5 or 6 months later because within those circles, those people talk. And then pretty soon you have people reaching out saying, I'm here from multiple people that I need to meet you. Who are you? Right.
Right.
And even though I was like the new kid on the block, plus I stood out being a guy in a women's world, that didn't hurt either. But being the new kid on the block, everybody's like, "Whoa, have you guys heard about this Chris Miles guy? Do you know about him or this?" And it just caught fire, you know. And not to mention created great relationships. And I wish I had done that before because when I was going through my first financial hardship, I was doing the opposite. I was actually closing off from relationships. I was suffering silently because I didn't want my scarcity to rub off on people, right? I didn't want to put my problems on other people. And it's not like I had to, but I was just so, you know, really just so cut off, you know,
Hmm.
in a sense. It's just like if I just figure my stuff out, once things are better, then I'll open up, then I'll be social. But the whole time I should have been social the whole time, you know, really, again, still looking to reach out to people, serve them, but also ask for, you know, ask for help in return.
Hmm.
And in fact, I did do that. I by eventually in 2015, because I was going through another divorce, right? That's why you don't ask me for marriage advice. But I was going through another divorce at that time. This was with my wife that I had 6 children with and everything. It was rough. I was emotionally hurting a lot to the point where I could barely even function. I could barely even answer emails. In fact, I was falling behind on a lot of my work. And so what happened at that point is I started to actually open up. I started to open up to those closer friends and people like that and just share what was going on in my life. It didn't mean I was asking them to help me or I didn't expect them to solve my problems for me, but I needed at least somebody to talk to and be able to get that out. And in some cases, some of them did help. Some of them even turned down helping me, you know, which was interesting, you know, which was fine. But it definitely helped to open up more and focus on those relationships. And eventually, as I got my emotions in check again and I was able to get things under control, things took off. And that's why in the next year I was actually able to retire that next year.
Well, it sounds to me like with your the problems that you had the first time that you had financial disaster, and
Mhm.
then the problems that you had on your second divorce, and where you closed off, yourself and sort of cocooned yourself in a way.
Mm,
Those sound like relationship mistakes, but it's also, I mean, I can understand why you would do that. You know,
mhm,
you maybe like with the financial piece, you maybe were a little embarrassed or a little,
mhm.
your pride was hurt, your ego
Oh,
was hurt a
sure.
little bit because you just lost a lot of money. So did a lot of other people, by the way.
Not
It
supposed to be
wasn't
the guy that
just
had it all
you.
figured out, right?
Right. Yeah. And you didn't, yeah, for a guy that had it all figured out, you didn't. And then of course with your marriage, I mean, I can speak to that myself. You know, you're so upended when that happens, when your
Mhm.
marriage falls apart. And, you just kind of embarrassed and kind of like the whole world's looking at you and judging you. It's kind of what it feels like. So I can understand in both of those situations why you would kind of cocoon in like you did.
Yeah.
Um,
But
but
luckily with
it,
the divorce, I didn't cocoon. I mean, that's the good news is that I
oh,
learned
you're,
not to cocoon.
mhm,
And that's why I turned around within months versus the first time it took years. And there was financial hardships because obviously, I pretty much just said here, just about take everything, other
mhm,
than my business, pretty much take everything you can. And, it wasn't a whole lot because I just launched Money Ripples a few years before. So I was reinvesting in my business quite a bit. But it did. I mean, the good news is if as I opened up and as I was still focusing on being those around people and relationships and even still trying to serve people the whole time, that's when things really did turn around for me.
right, right. Yeah. So would you say that for business success, then your opening up in relationships is a really big way to be successful then? Is that what, would you say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always about it's not even about who you know, it's about who knows you,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's what I've learned too. Because you can know lots of people, you might be acquainted with people, but if they don't think of you, then obviously they're not thinking of you, right? There's not really that reciprocation as much. But as I've really have focused on trying to get people to know me on a personal level, that's the biggest thing. So when I go to networking groups, I don't try to meet 20 people. I was like, give me your name, give me your number. Like, I don't care. I try to find one or two. That's it. Just
Hmm.
one or two I can start to build a real deep, meaningful, quality relationship with versus just a bunch of quantity. And that's where more opportunities come. I mean, literally just before recording this, I had a guy that texted me and reached out. It was actually a connection from somebody else that said, hey, you two should meet. I think you guys really connect. And I met him, and this guy was also a very big go giver, and we just hit it off right off the bat. And the
Hmm.
great thing is that because he's an investor in different businesses, like with Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank or whatnot, like I was able to connect with him, and then he literally just said, "Hey, Chris, give me a call," and he's like, "Hey, let's get this affiliate thing worked out where we can actually start exchanging business." Like I was already sending them referrals. He's like, "I want to start sending you referrals. Let's get this affiliate thing in place so that we can start doing that." And he's like, and here's how you do it. Here's how to make sure that you get in like the good graces of this company that I'm a partner in. And so I said, great, you tell me what to do, I'll do it. And that would have never happened had I not had a relationship because otherwise you're always the outside looking in. When you have those people that do know you and they know that, they know your heart, they know your integrity and that sort of thing, that will pass on and that leads to other relationships and other connections and it just blossoms from there.
It just ripples.
It does. It's a
Yeah.
ripple, right?
Yeah. Just ripples. Yeah. So what are you looking for in clients and on your day to day? Who do you help? Who do you want to help?
Well, definitely we help the people that are looking more for time freedom, right? They know
Hmm.
that the key to more time freedom is be able to buy that time back, and that's where money freedom comes in. So a lot of times we get people that are like business owners that are just super, they're do great, they're profitable, they're established in their business, but then they realize, wait a minute, if I keep going at this rate, I'm actually in my own rat race. I'm stuck. Like 2020 was so amazing because it was like this kind of a warning shot, right? Because in 2020, when we had these non-essential businesses shut down,
Hmm.
people realized, oh, am I okay? What
Hmm.
if I got shut down for a couple months or whatever? Like, would my business survive this?
Hmm.
And so this is where like, that passive income and everything is so important because any of our clients that were in that situation, they were fine. They didn't, they were okay if they had to shut their doors for a bit. They didn't have to shut down their business because they were taken care of just fine at home. And so that's where I get people to try to really be work optional. They work because they want to, not because they have to, because their money's working harder for them than they have to work so hard for that money.
So I invite my Deal Scout listeners to reach out to me by hitting the link below, and I will connect you on to Chris. If you want to talk to him, you have any ideas or thoughts or questions and concerns, reach out to me. I'll connect you to him. And just we're always on the hunt at Deal Scout. We're always on the hunt for people that are looking for deals and looking for ways to increase their income, looking for ways to make money. And that's why we appreciate guests like Chris today. So if you are interested in being on the Deal Scout, I would love to have you reach out to me at susan@thedealscout.com. Chris, I thank you so much for being here today and hope to see you again soon.
Hope so too. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. So that's it for us. I hope you have a terrific day and we will see you again. This is Susan Reilly with the Deal Scouts.